podcast, the official podcast of comicsleet.com. My name is Joseph. Thank you for being here with us. This is episode 3. On today's episode, we are going to be talking about the book A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. I think if you listen to our first podcast, or if you go back and listen to it at the beginning, I mentioned that we recorded that one thinking it was episode 2 because we lost our first episode. This is kind of the lost first episode. We lost this episode, and we weren't sure if we were going to re-record it, but we thought it was important just because we both took the time to read this book, and we both enjoyed it quite a bit, and it means quite a bit to us for different reasons that we'll get into during our discussion. So we decided to re-record it and put it out. So you're listening to episode 3 now. We're talking about A Tale for the Time Being. Just a content warning for this discussion. We are going to be talking about suicide and suicidal ideation, as that is something that comes up in the book. We are also going to be talking about sexual assault. Both of those discussions are pretty brief, but they are things that come up in the book, and so we do discuss them briefly during our conversation, just so I think people should be aware of that, just so they know what they're getting into. But yeah, so thank you for being here. Thank you for coming on this journey with us. This is episode 3. This one's coming out a little bit late. Hopefully I'll get better at putting these out on Wednesday evening. This one is coming a little bit late, but thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation. All right, so I think we should start, I think last time we got a little bit caught up going between plot and theme, kind of fluidly, which I can imagine is a little bit confusing to listen to. So we're just going to start off with a plot summation that Angela has from Wikipedia. So let's start there.
Alrighty. A Tale for the Time Being is a metafictional novel by Ruth Ozeki, narrated by 2 characters, a 16-year-old Japanese-American girl in Tokyo who keeps a diary, and a Japanese-American writer living on an island off British Columbia who finds the diary washed up on the shore sometime after the 2011 tsunami that devastated Japan.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. Yeah, so this... Right, this is like this book is set up very interesting in the way that there's one chapter dedicated to Ruth, who finds the diary of Now. Right, she finds a diary after it has been washed away by the 2011 earthquake and subsequent tsunami that hit Japan. Right, so. I think the book starts with a chapter from Now, then a chapter.
Who is the Japanese girl?
Yeah, Now's Japanese girl. Was she born in the U.S. and then they moved back, or was she born?
No, I think she was born in Japan, and then they moved when she was young, but then they ended up moving back to Japan.
Okay, yeah. So. Right, has sort of a mix of Japanese and American influence, but this is very much a book that is set in and about Japan in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? 9/11 is a point that sort of plays a significant, or it's sort of a significant, historical point in this book. But yeah, so you get a chapter from Now, you get a chapter from Ruth. And the chapters from Now are framed as she's writing in her diary to someone, right? She doesn't know exactly who she's writing to, but it's written as if she's writing it to you, right? Because she addresses like you, the reader, right? So there's very much this sense in which you are like, she has an awareness that someone is sort of reading her work, right? So it's, while it is like something that has happened in the past, it's also sort of something that sort of happens in the present, right? Like she could have written this 10 years ago, which she did, or she could have like written this yesterday. So it has that interesting like give and play where she's like has an awareness that someone's reading her work. How did you think that like affected your interpretation of the book, or how did you like interpret that?
I thought it was interesting. I thought that because when Ruth, the writer who finds the diary, she's reading it and she kind of like gets lost between like reading it as if it's happening right now versus like the fact that it like now had written it years before. I sort of got that feeling too, where it's like it feels like you're reading it as if it's like happening in the moment as you're reading it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yeah, so it's this really interesting structure, right? And it's this book is very much playing with time, right? Like the title, A Tale for the Time Being, is very much a play on um some thoughts from her grandma, who's a Zen Buddhist monk, about like time and the time being, and like the time being, right? The time being as a person and the time being as like the present moment. And the book is very much like playing with that all the way through, in the way that Ruth, right? Ruth is sort of Ruth has that same, right? Ruth interprets it the same way, that she's sort of thinking that it happened yesterday, or it's happening, right? As if it is something very present, even though like in the back of her head, she's aware that this is, something that washed up on the shore because of the tsunami, but she can't sort of separate the like then from the now, right? And we have to be careful when we say that, right? Because, like I said, this book is playing with time, right? The now, when I say now, I mean like now the present versus now the person. Because her name is Nao, but it is also pronounced now.
We could call her by her full name, Naoko.
Naoko, yeah, we'll call, yeah. Well, that's probably a good idea. We'll call her Naoko. Yeah. So, yeah, that book is very much about the person that you are at like different moments in your life, and I think we'll get into that a little bit later. I guess want to talk about right now. This is a book that, and on the copy that you have, this is a book that I got on sort of my first official day as a college student, right? We went to like freshman orientation in the like in the gym, and they handed us this book as we went in, right? And it says in big letters on the back, not for individual resale. Otherwise I probably would have like tried to give it to a bookstore and get like a little bit of money for it. But so I ended up reading it. I think I ended up reading it during my freshman year, and I read it. This is the third time I've read it, and it's always sort of stuck with me. And I was thinking about that, like, why is this a book I come back to, right? It's a good book. I it's not the best book I've ever read, but it's good. And I think I read it during a period of time, right? So I started university at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is, the same place that you're at right now. And those first 3 years, because I transferred after my third year, were like quite difficult, dark, like just years where I was very unhappy for reasons that I couldn't totally explain, right? And I think you saw a lot of that when I would like come home on the weekends. And some of my, I guess probably some of my happiest moments for sure were reading, sitting in my like studio apartments, like reading books. I read this, like I took a Russian literature class. I took sort of like an American literature class. Reading this book, I read through all the Harry Potter books, which is, highly problematic. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point, right? I don't think I would read through those again with everything that's going to be on with J.K. Rowling, but those are like very happy memories for me, and this book's very much a part of that. And I guess I was thinking about like why those are some of my happiest memories. And I think I've maybe told you this, but like if I went back to college again, I don't think I would like get a science degree, right? I think I would want to go into like literature or like journalism or writing or something around like English, because I have like such good memories associated with that, and those are like some of the times that I was definitely the happiest in college. um and I think part of this book is about sort of recognizing sort of or being at peace with like parts of yourself that you don't sort of totally understand why you feel a certain way. We will get to that in a bit. But so what you've read this book twice now. What has like made you come back to it, or what has like kept it in your head?
Um, I I don't know. I just like to reread books. It doesn't really matter if I was like absolutely in love with them or if I just like liked them a little bit. I really like to just reread things, rewatch things. And I just remember that because I read this for the first time when I was a sophomore in high school. And I just remember I really liked it. It was definitely like something that I had, the kind of thing that I haven't read before. Um, just because of like the way that it was written and then like the fact that it was set in Japan. And so now as a sophomore in college, I sort of just remember how much that I liked it when I was younger. So I just wanted to read it again.
Mm-hmm. And do you like, what was it just, do you remember like what specifically appealed to you, or just was it just that like that style that you hadn't read anything like that before?
Um, this style, I did really like how, because it's set in Japan, there's like some Japanese words. And I just remember being really interested in like, I like could even like remember some of those words like even now. And I just thought that was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very much, so the writer Ruth Ozeki, right? She's a Japanese American writer, right? It is very much like of it's very much like from Japan, and I think it's very much based on like the little research I've done. Right, I think we both sort of read this article from Bloomberg talking about I believe it's the, what is it, the hikikomori, right? Is that, yeah, hikikomori, right? Which is a word that comes up like a few times in the book, right? Because this is how her she identifies her dad as a hikikomori. And so it's very much set in a specific time and place in Japan. Which I think is kind of a good place to get into the plot a little bit, right? So now born in Japan, her parents moved to California in the late 90s, or like mid to late 90s. Her dad becomes a successful software developer, involved in the technical internet computer. I don't know why I'm stumbling over that.
Going.
Her dad is involved in like tech in the internet, right? But then he loses his job during the .com bubble that happens in the late 90s, early 2000s, and they're forced, they lose a lot of money because all of his money was stock in the company. That stock became worth nothing. They had to move back to Japan. So they move back, and the dad is very much he's demoralized, right? As you would be, like, I think his value, feeling that his like value as a person was very much tied up in like being able to provide for his family, and right, so now talks about him as being a hikikomori, which is this word that from what I've read about it, mostly in this Boomer piece, they talk about it normally applies to like adolescent shut-ins that spend a lot of time in their room, and sort of now it kind of has evolved to mean like in your room, but like also spending a lot of time on the internet, right? But now it's sort of evolved to also apply to people in their 40s and 50s, right? So there's this idea in Japan of 80-50, where there's sort of a generation of people who are in their 40s and 50s, but they live with their parents who are, the same, like the age of people that we would refer to as baby boomers, right? People in their like late 60s, 70s, and 80s, but they have these sons and daughters in their 40s and 50s who still live with them and have never really moved out. And, one of the reasons for that is something that comes up in the book, right? It's very important to kind of get a good job or get a good place at a university, because that leads to a good job, which kind of sets you up for, life down the road in your like late teens and early 20s. And so when they came back, like her dad sort of wasn't plugged into that and couldn't, struggled to get a job. But something that I really appreciate about the book is like, I don't think it's ever judgmental of him, right? I think it always kind of, right, he like spends a lot of time reading philosophy and like making paper mache origami, sorry, not paper mache, origami, like insects, but it never like frames him in a negative light. I don't know. What did you think about the way it like framed her dad?
I mean, Naoko definitely didn't frame her dad in like the greatest light. I think that like, no, I don't think that the author Ruth Ozeki really made any like let her any of like her opinions like on like whether like the dad was like what he was doing, and like her opinions on that. But I think that from like Naoko's perspective, we could tell that she was pretty disappointed in her dad because he was like that.
Do you think that evolves, right? So and then like, there's sort of this struggle with her dad to like find employment or even just kind of find purpose, right? And so I think now Naoko is also struggling with that because she like kind of feels that high school, right, as someone like coming back, she's sort of struggling to find her place in her like high school and sort of back with people her own age, right? And so her journey is kind of to go and stay with her grandma, right, who's a Zen Buddhist monk, who I guess I think is the sort of like thematic philosophical center of this book. Do you think Naoko's development on her father sort of changes from the beginning to the end, like after she spends time with her grandma, whose name is Jiko? It's when we refer to Jiko, that's her grandmother.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like before she went to go stay with Jiko over the summer, she sort of regarded her dad as like sort of like I don't know if like deadbeat is the right word, or just like not very useful to society.
I think that's probably a good way to put it, not useful, yeah.
She was just kind of disappointed in him, but I also think that because during her time with Jiko is when she found those letters from her great uncle, who she, based on those letters, she like grew to have this like idea of her great uncle who she saw as like a hero, and then she saw her dad who was unemployed, like made origami insects, and I think that sort of comparing them together in her mind, she was maybe still disappointed in him. But I think towards the end of the book, definitely, Naoko ended up understanding her dad more, or like at least they came to like, they were able to like connect better, and I think that led her to view him differently.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that allows her to do that, right, is her dad's really interested in philosophy, and her great uncle, he died. He was enlisted into the Japanese Air Force during World War II and died like as a kamikaze pilot in World War II, right? But before that, he was a philosophy student at university, right? And I think that sort of connection creates like some empathy and understanding, sort of for what her dad is going through. And I think that sort of development, right, of like viewing her, how she views her dad, but also how she views herself is kind of where is, I guess, kind of where I like draw out the theme of the book. I guess I want to say one thing before we move on. One other reason I would say that like the book doesn't like too harshly judge her dad is because he it like go so there's a point, and this is like a content warning for sexual assault because that is in this book, which I forgot about, and it's like very shocking. But so at one point, Naoko is assaulted by students at her high school. When she's in the bathroom, they like hold her down, and they take her the underwear that she was wearing throughout the day, and then later she finds them for sale on the internet. And one of the thing, well, like, so this is kind of a big turning point in the book, but after Ruth, right? So Ruth is like reading Naoko's diary, and Ruth reads this section of the book, and Ruth's partner, Oliver, right? He like is very quick to point out that as this auction is going on, like there's a point when it becomes obvious that Naoko's dad was like trying to, right? He was trying to be the one who won the bid so that like they wouldn't go to someone else, right? To like preserve, right? Just like a good act, right? To,
so some stranger didn't have his daughter's underwear.
Yeah, absolutely, right? I guess they want to say like to help his daughter like avoid shame, or like didn't have to feel bad about herself, right? It's like a very empathetic act that he like went out of his way and to try to do for her, right? And the book like goes to point that out, right? So even, I guess that's kind of the point where I like draw out that like he's not, it doesn't like frame him in this like very negative light, because he never, there's a point at which like he's not giving up or like totally checked out, right?
Yeah.
And then, until the very end, in which, and another content warning, for like suicide and suicidal ideation, Naoko's dad joins a suicide club, and at two different points does try to commit suicide. And then she sees, I think they're in the second time that he tries, right? He writes this note that is like, says something to the effect of, if you like understand that you failed, or your life like is worth nothing, then like what's the point of going on like living, right? And she, at that point, kind of, I think you do get the sense that he's given up, but I guess I would still, in the way I understand, the book still doesn't like, it's still not like judging him too harshly, which I guess kind of the point, right? So Naoko and her dad, right, they both go on these like, they're both very different people from the end of the book or from the beginning of the book to the end of the book, right? And at the end of the book, sort of the significant thing that happens at the end is Naoko's grandfather, her dad's mother, Chiko,
grandmother. You said grandfather.
Oh, sorry. Naoko's grandmother, her dad's mother, dies, right? And so the last thing she says to both of them, right, in front of like a bunch of other people, because her death is sort of significant because she is this like very old, kind of famous Zen Buddhist monk, she said to them to live, right? And there's sort of this like couple pages where like everyone else is trying to figure it out, but Naoko and her dad seem to know what it means implicitly. What did you what did you take away from that scene?
I think that the wording on it, the to live, not just like live, because if it was just like, if she just said live, it's like a command, right? Whereas like I took it as like, because Jiko understood sort of what Naoko was going through, what her father was going through, and it was almost like a suggestion, or like a, just like a, like, think about it, or like,
The way I think about it is that like a statement. I think you're absolutely right. It's not a verb. It's not a command, right? But it's sort of like a statement of intent, right? Or it's Jiko's statement of what she's taken away from her life, right? It's a statement of like, to living, right, is like the process of the thing is what's important. I don't know. What do you, I don't want to
yeah,
interrupt your thought.
I can't exactly, like, I don't really know how to word it, but it's almost just like, sort of like a reminder that, like, of them both to just, like, keep going, I guess.
Yeah. I'm totally there with you, right? I think it's very important that it's not a verb, right? It's not live, right? It's to live. And I guess the way I was thinking about it is like, it's again like a statement of intent, or somehow emphasizing that the process of living is what's important. Which is, I guess, where I think the theme of the book lies, right? Because I think you have, I guess you kind of have these five main characters. You have like Naoko, her dad, Ruth, who's reading the diary, and then Ruth's partner, Oliver, who Ruth is reading the diary to, right? So he hears the whole diary, right? And you have sort of Ruth reading this diary, right? And Ruth thinks, right, she's published this book. It was like pretty successful, but now this diary is like a way for her to like procrastinate, right? Because she like puts a ton of time into this diary, trying to like, she kind of ends up trying to solve it like a mystery, right? It's a bit,
Yeah.
it consumes her life in this weird way, whereas like Oliver has this much more sort of steady, rational response to it, where he understands, right? Like you said at the beginning, right? Ruth is sort of viewing this as something that happened like yesterday, right? Or it's something that happening in the present, whereas Oliver very much understands that it's like something that happened in the past, right? Where, and then you have, Ruth, who's going through all this, Naoko, Naoko, who's going through all this. You have Jiko, who's kind of observing, and then you have like her father, who's also struggling to sort of figure out what he wants his life to be after what his life in California was ended. And so you have all these people interacting with the story from different sort of points of their life. And something Jiko always says is, right, Ruth, or now I keep saying Ruth, but Naoko will, she'll say kind of two opposite things, and Jiko will like restate it and then say same thing, right? And, I feel like from there, she's sort of highlighting the continuity of life, right? That you're not ever separate from, right? The person you were 10 years ago is not like separate from the person you are now, right? There's some continuity right there. So don't judge that like judge that person in the past too harshly, right? Like, understand who they were and why you believe different things or you behave different things, but don't judge them too harshly, because that was still you, that is still a part of you. And I guess, yeah, so I like came away from this book thinking about like the continuity of a life, right? And that it's, the value isn't in like where you end up, or like, or you know, there isn't explicitly in where you end up or like what you've done, right? Which I think is sort of I think, you know, there's I was listening to a podcast today about the kind of hidden subliminal messaging in, like, you ever heard of like a 30 under 30 list? Have you heard of like the
Yeah.
Forbes? Yeah, right. The sort of subliminal messaging, and like you have to have accomplished certain things by like a certain age, otherwise your like value as a person is affected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in that statement, Chico's statement of intent, like to live, like the value is in the process of the thing from the beginning to the end, right? It's not in certain moments, right? It's in the whole, to use the like title's name, right? It's in the whole time being, right? It's in like the whole thing. Um, do you, what do you, I don't know, do you like agree with that, or what, like, what's the thing? What is the thing that you like took away from this? Or I guess, yeah, what did you like really take away from this book?
Yeah, I think that you put it, or you said it really well. I also just think that like she was sort of maybe trying, because like both Naoko and her dad went through some like pretty like tough or like traumatic experiences, and I think that Chico was maybe just trying to like point out that like to like, and not to like move on and not to like embrace them, but just to like accept that like their lives haven't been easy,
Mm-hmm.
and like they've all like they've both gone through some shit,
Mm-hmm.
but to sort of accept it and then to like live anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the one thing I struggle with is like, right, because it's kind of shitty to be like, oh, bad things happen, you like move on and like deal with it, right? Like I would never want to say that to a person, because like they go through some and deal with some like truly horrendous traumatic things that would like affect anyone, right? But I think Chico's encouraging them not to sort of judge, like look back and judge who that person was, or think that somehow like they deserved that or brought it on themselves, I guess I would hope, right? And I guess that's why I keep coming to this back to this idea of like, don't judge yourself or anyone too harshly, because, you know, I guess if that is, if you're like, you know, it's difficult to move on if you're like thinking about why you aren't what you think you should be, you know what I mean? And you know, I think we, you know, we get kind of a happy ending for Naoko and her father, right? But I think that only kind of happens once they, and again, I don't want to say like reconcile or move on, but once they like let that past be a part of them, right? Do you remember what Naoko ends up doing? I was trying to remember. Did she become like a writer or a speaker?
I feel like she goes, I can find it in here.
Okay, you find that real quick, right? So
yeah.
her dad, he ends up becoming, right, he ends up like becoming going back into the tech field and developing software that crawls the internet. They describe it like a spider crawling over the internet, sort of deleting embarrassing or shameful things that a person might not want on there about themselves, right? And that very much comes out of the experience he had with his daughter, and, you know, at what we described before, what happened with Naoko, right? So that experience very much informed what he went forward and like did with himself and what he found meaning in later in his life. And did you find what Naoko did?
No, I know that like she gets an email supposedly, or she sees an email supposedly from Naoko's dad. Here it is. Naoko ends up going to go study in Canada.
Okay. Okay. Was there anything in there about her being a writer, or am I
No,
like okay?
I think that was
I'm
just you.
okay. I'm projecting.
Yeah.
Okay, right. But so yeah, so Nyako goes on to she was like, oh, I struggling like with school and everything in Japan, right? But like again, right, didn't found some way. And again, I don't want to like save past or like moved on or whatever, but that was not the thing that like defined her the rest of her life.
Oh,
Yeah, I
and
guess
she
I
studies. She is studying culture and the language of French.
okay. Oh, okay. That's so. Her diary is written. She's writing it right. She buys this diary, and the thing about the diary is that someone took out it's a book, but someone took out the pages of the book and put blank pages in. So when you're looking at it from the outside, it looks like a book called, I forget the name of the French name of the book.
In Something of Time.
So the name of the book in English is called In Search of Lost Time, right?
Yeah.
Which I think gets back to that idea of you being, right? There's something about being stuck searching for something that you think should be there, right? But if, you know what I mean? Like being stuck, being like, oh, I should have done this, or I should have spent this time better, right? And I think that kind of speaks to like Ruth's procrastinating or something, or just, I guess I feel this, and I was thinking this before, like, I wonder, I think back on those years in Madison, right, when I originally read this book, is like I do think that those were like 3 wasted years in a sense, and I think I've moved past that a little bit still, because I wouldn't, without those years, I wouldn't be where I am now, right? So they like very much are part of that process, right? But like I think that is sort of why in like my early and mid 20s, like very much fixated on that, is like, oh, why didn't I do something more with that, right? But like if the best thing that came out of it is like me reading this book and me like enjoying reading, like that's okay. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, I hope we haven't rambled too much, and that was like a little bit of a scatter shot uh explanation or discussion of the book, but I think that kind of typifies the book in a certain sense. Like it definitely makes sense, you never get lost, but it is just like it's a little all over the place at times. There's like
There's
some
yeah.
yeah, there's like some magical realism at the end that feels like a little out of place, and it would be my one major critique. I don't think we need to get into it, but I think there are parts of the book that feel like slightly less than cohesive. So maybe our conversation reflects that. Anyways, we're gonna come back in a second. We've both got a couple things we've been enjoying with just some final thoughts for the week. We'll be back in 1 sec. Thank you.
All right, so we're back, and now we're just gonna share some things that we've been interested in. I'm gonna start. So I am backstory, I guess. I am majoring in community and nonprofit leadership in college right now, and for one of my nonprofit classes, I had to read Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. It's a memoir about Bryan Stevenson, who is an attorney who founded Equal Justice Initiative, which is a legal practice dedicated to defending people who can't really afford lawyers or wrongly condemned or those trapped in like death row. And I really enjoyed it. I really like reading memoirs as a whole. I just think that they're really engaging and interesting. So I really, really like this one, and I would recommend it now to anybody.
And it's been turned in
it's
a movie,
a movie
right?
now.
Yeah, I think Michael B. Jordan plays the main role.
Yeah. I'm going to watch it eventually.
Okay.
I have to write my book report first.
Nice. I gotta check that out. I got like one book that I gotta read, but that sounds good. All right, I've been playing a game. It's a new Switch game. It came out like 2 weeks ago. It's called Hades. It's the new game by Supergiant Games. They made Bastion and Transistor and Pyre. And this game has been in early access since like late 2018, but it just entered, they just put out like the 1.0 update, and it came out on Switch, so I've been playing it on Switch. It's a roguelike, which means that it's a roguelike run-based game, which means you sort of go through the same path, right? There's like, their path is sort of like, it varies a little bit. There's randomly generated like rooms, so the rooms are a little bit different, but the like main areas and the bosses within some of those rooms are the same. But I usually really struggle with those types of games because I appreciate a game with a linear progression where I can very much see my progress from one end to the other. And I've played a few other roguelikes, and it just kind of feels like beating your head against a wall. And I think Hades gets by this in a really interesting way by making each of your, right, you go back to the beginning when you die in one of the rooms, and it makes those deaths a intricate part of the narrative. You're playing as Zagreus, the son of Hades, right, who controls the underworld in Greek mythology, or the Greek pantheon of gods. And so you're interacting with all like the different gods, right? You're interacting with Hades, who's your father. You're interacting with Achilles. He's dead in the underworld with you. You're interacting with like Zeus and Poseidon and Athena and Hermes, right? They're all sort of helping you try to get out of the underworld, right? And so the narrative's great. Like the voice acting and the music and the characterization of each of the gods has been really wonderful. And it just makes each of those loops, right? It makes each of those loops really enjoyable in a narrative way. And then when you're going through a run, the gameplay is really nice, right? You feel very like in control, and whenever you make a mistake, you're aware that it's like your fault. So they've just sort of married those two things into like one amazing package that I've been playing a lot recently. And at times when I should be doing my work, I'm playing that game. But yeah, Hades has been really fun lately. I've been trying to get Angela to play it. I'm trying to get you to play it. It's hard.
I might not.
Yeah, it's like genuinely a difficult game, which you said you're not totally up for, which is fair. But yeah. All right, so that's everything for this episode. Thank you for listening. We're gonna come back next week with we both are gonna watch The King of Staten Island, which Angela's been trying to get me to watch since
It took
June.
him to start a podcast for him to actually sit down and watch it.
Yes. So yes, Angela got me to watch it. We're gonna talk about that next week if you wanna, watch along with us. But thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.